This video is about one question and one question only. What happened to John Fetterman? And I want to clarify what I mean here. One, I'm not talking about his stroke or the depression that he's dealt with or anything like that. I'm not here to be ableist, and you shouldn't be either. I'm also not engaging in conspiracy. I'm not talking about him being cloned or replaced or any deep state narrative. Instead, I want to figure out why John Fetterman has gone from somebody being praised as a progressive to someone who now almost exclusively makes news through the use of right-wing rhetoric. When John Fetterman was initially elected to the Senate in 2022, he was seen as a progressive on a variety of issues, whether he agreed with that label or not. And he did agree with that label, at least at one point. Fetterman garnered even more attention with his refusal to wear a suit on the Senate floor, something that made Senate Republicans very angry, which is funny because he opted for a hoodie and shorts, an American outfit if there ever was one. But this is a video distinctly for the left, because liberals, progressives, and leftists alike all defended John Fetterman despite his faults because he was better than the alternative. But recently he's been regarded as having abandoned the left, specifically on the issues of immigration and Palestine. Now he garners a lot of disdain from people on the left and a lot of praise from people on the right. So what happened? Did something change? Did he shift his political stances, or was he always like this? That's what I aim to find out. Let's start from the beginning. One main reason I wanted to make this video is because if you look up Fetterman Gaza or Fetterman immigration, you only get recent articles and statements. That shows what he believes now, but not if he's changed over time. And that shift over time, I think, is important for people on the left. There's no real comprehensive look at Fetterman's political trajectory over time. Just some articles of people praising him and others denouncing him. So I think we need to go back to the beginning and look at what Fetterman was like in his time before the Senate. Fetterman had an admittedly affluent upbringing, saying that he sleepwalked through much of his adult life. In 2005, John Fetterman ran for mayor of Braddock, a borough about 10 miles away from Pittsburgh. He won over the incumbent, Pauline Abdullah, by just one vote. Braddock is a town that was ravaged by the effects of deindustrialization, just like a lot of other places in the Midwest. So it's not surprising to see that a lot of Fetterman's activity was based around rebuilding and attracting new people to Braddock. And according to his Wikipedia page, he actually accomplished quite a few things as mayor. He started a youth and arts program to develop abandoned buildings, he purchased a church that he turned into a community center, converted some vacant lots into gardens and parks, led Braddock to a historically low homicide rate, although it's unclear if that can actually be attributed to him as mayor. He began marrying LGBTQ couples in his own home in defiance of a 1996 Pennsylvania law. All good things. Points to John Fetterman. Then there's the shotgun incident, which will come up later too. In 2013 at 4 p.m. on a Saturday, Mayor John Fetterman heard what he thought was gunshots. He rushed to his truck to pursue a man that he thought was fleeing on foot. Thinking this man was associated with the perceived gunshots, Fetterman drove after him, then got out of his truck in pursuit, holding a shotgun in his hand. Turns out this was just a citizen, Chris Mieres, a black man that was going for a run. Chris said he didn't know what was happening until Fetterman had a shotgun pointed at his chest. He also noted in interviews that the sounds were just kids playing with bottle rockets. Now, Fetterman denies ever having pointed a weapon directly at his chest, but he does admit to holding a shotgun, although he claims it was unchambered and the safety was still on, but it's not like Chris could have known that. While this isn't exactly vigilante justice, it still isn't a great look, and it's reflective of the broader trend of law enforcement immediately treating black men with suspicion. But no one was hurt. It could have been far worse. Minus a few points for John Fetterman. In 2016, John Fetterman had his first run for the Senate in Pennsylvania, but he lost in the primary. Also in 2016, he endorsed Bernie Sanders for president.
I am proud to endorse Bernie Sanders today. Bernie Sanders and I agree on a lot of other issues too that are critical to this country's future. Whether it's immigration, whether it's marijuana legalization, whether it's universal pre-K or affordability for college education.
In 2017, John Fetterman ran in the Democratic primary for lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. He won 38% of the primary vote, enough to clinch the nomination and end up on the ticket with Governor Tom Wolf, eventually winning in 2018. Bernie Sanders endorsed him for that position. As lieutenant governor, his focus seemed to be on a few specific issues. First was marijuana legalization. He visited all 67 counties of Pennsylvania to field comments on how residents felt about the legalization of weed in the state. As reported by Justin Schweizer in 2021, these findings weren't scientific in nature, but they were used to build a report arguing in favor of the legalization later on. Weed still isn't legal for recreational use in Pennsylvania, as far as I know, but you can't really pin that on Fetterman. His second focus was LGBTQ issues. Reportedly, he was a vocal supporter of the LGBTQ. He even hung a weed and pride flag over his office balcony at the state capitol. The practice of hanging your own flags was banned later on by the state legislature, I think in response to what he was doing. But he continued to do it. Kinda cool. Lastly was criminal justice reforms. As chair of the Board of Pardons, Fetterman worked to recommend pardons or commutations on the sentences of 32 different people, many with nonviolent or marijuana charges, but some with murder convictions as well. Say what you will about the politics of that issue, second chances are a good thing. And while 32 seems like a low number, especially for someone who's being judged as a progressive, it was still a record high in the state. In 2020, John Fetterman got into some internet beef with Donald Trump, who was trying to steal the election. Of course, Pennsylvania being a swing state, Trump and his allies tried to get the results to change. Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas and demon walking this earth, filed lawsuits against Pennsylvania and other states to try to overturn the election results. And the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, offered a $1 million reward for people who could prove voter fraud. So John Fetterman took this personally, noting that he did find voter fraud. In fact, he said people were casting ballots for their dead mothers in favor of Trump. Needless to say, John Fetterman did not see any of that $1 million reward money. Now that's a summary of 15 years of political history for John Fetterman. Overall, not bad. An upper middle class, very large, bald white man, becomes a mayor of a small town, does a couple of good things, becomes lieutenant governor, does some more good things, makes some national headlines dunking on Trump. No gripes from me. But this brings us to when Fetterman's national name recognition really got a massive boost. On February 8th, 2021, John Fetterman officially entered the race for the U.S. Senate seat in Pennsylvania. In a statement shortly after, Fetterman said, "I believe the union way of life is sacred. I believe in healthcare as a fundamental, basic human right. I believe in environmental justice. I believe our criminal justice system needs a significant overhaul. I believe the war on drugs needs to stop and we need to legalize marijuana across the country. I believe that the LGBTQIA community deserves the same rights and protections that the rest of us enjoy in this country." During the primary and certainly into the general election, John Fetterman was praised as a progressive candidate by a variety of political figures.
And you have corporate Democrat Connor Lamb up against progressive Democrat John Fetterman. There's a lot of stuff to like about Fetterman. He's a workers kind of Democrat. I love that he went around wearing like basketball shorts to meet President Biden. Cannot tell you how much I respect that.
He has a real chance of winning not just the primary, but the general. He has the strategy that I think is accurate, and he has a lot of the politics that we subscribe to here on the show.
Fetterman is like a perfect candidate in many ways. He's tall. He's strong. He truly seems like he cares.
Is Fetterman a socialist or just a progressive? He's just a progressive. He's not like some crazy lefty or whatever. The main thing that people like about Fetterman from the left is that he's not a corporate Dem. He's very not a corporate Dem.
And yes, even HITO.
But I feel like this speaks to the strength of Fetterman as a candidate, to say that he can have a fucking stroke, but yet Pennsylvania still wants him over Oz. One, because Oz is a dog shit candidate, and two, because Fetterman is just good.
I mean, look at him. Large, bald white man in the Democratic Party. That's a good aesthetic. But were we right to say he was progressive? At that point, it was hard not to, because Fetterman in the past identified himself as a progressive. Of course, he endorsed Bernie Sanders before and was endorsed by Bernie Sanders for lieutenant governor. But also in 2018, he tweeted out, "Progressive rhetoric is great, but progressive results are 100." In 2020, Fetterman reiterated that he's a progressive Democrat in a tweet joking about his background in virtual meetings. Now look, I'm not someone to read into somebody's tweets too much, but I think they are useful here. Also, pair this with his fairly progressive policies as lieutenant governor and mayor, and he looks pretty progressive up to this point. He did support fracking pretty openly in 2022, but this was seen as more of political posturing than any ideological commitment, simply because the gas industry is important for Pennsylvania. It should be noted that at one point he did call himself just a Democrat in 2022.
Are you a progressive?
No, I'm just a Democrat that has always run on what I believe and know to be true.
But this doesn't nullify his previously progressive positions, nor does it take away from his public perception as a progressive, which he had to have been aware of. So he was seen as a progressive before, and he saw himself as a progressive, but there's two topics specifically where people think he switched up. That's immigration and Israel. During a 2022 Democratic primary debate for the Pennsylvania Senate seat, Fetterman and his opponents were asked about Title 42. Title 42 was a Trump-era immigration policy that allowed the federal government to expel immigrants from the nation far faster than normal, using COVID-19 as a justification. And despite positioning himself as better than Trump on the border, Biden continued using Title 42, effectively maintaining Trump-era policy, which reflected poorly on a lot of Democrats who were trying to draw contrast with people on the right. In this debate, Fetterman functionally said he's fine with maintaining Title 42 2042. But he also voiced a desire to see a pathway to citizenship.
I believe it requires a deeper level of planning and understanding of exactly where the pandemic's going to continue. And I think it would be a rash judgment to revoke it too soon without careful consideration of the direction of where ultimately COVID's going. But also, we need to enact and have for decades comprehensive, compassionate, common sense immigration reform in this country. My wife was a former dreamer. Immigration makes America America, and I've long been a proponent of what immigration stands for and what it holds for this country.
In another debate, Fetterman voiced those same desires to see a pathway to citizenship, saying we can't just deport our way out of issues with immigration.
I'm married to a former dreamer. Her country fled a dangerous situation in Brazil when she was 7, and I absolutely support a path to citizenship for those immigrants that are already here. We are not going to deport our way out of this. We are going to acknowledge that immigration makes America America. It makes it what America is special. And my wife's origin story has informed my own views to the point where we need to make sure we are honoring the contributions that they've made, and they deserve a path to legal citizenship.
Fetterman also, on the immigration issue, likes to invoke his wife, a dreamer, who came here undocumented, I think at around the age 7. Dreamers are those under DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, who come to the country as undocumented children. It's basically a set of legal protections for undocumented kids. The important part here is that Fetterman seems to stress compassion on the issue, noting that he wants comprehensive immigration reform, but that we have to do so thoughtfully, keeping in mind the needs of immigrants who are human beings. On Fetterman's website right now, you can find a blurb talking about a compassionate answer that includes strong borders and humane policies, in a video echoing that same message.
Immigration makes America America. I'm standing in front of a mill that was built on the backs and the blood, sweat, tears, and lives of immigrants that built this country. We diminish ourselves and are never more un-American when we eliminate citizenship for those that just simply want to contribute.
And in his debate with Dr. Oz in the general election, he would go on to say basically the same thing.
You know, I believe that a secure border can be compatible with compassion. I believe we need a comprehensive and bipartisan solution for immigration.
Fetterman, of course, would go on to defeat Mehmet Oz, but it's insane that we ever had Dr. Oz running for the Senate to begin with. I feel like a lot of people forgot about that. We shouldn't forget about that. But into the year 2023 and 2024 is when things get interesting for Fetterman. At the end of 2023, immigration really began to ramp up as a top issue on the minds of voters, partially motivated by a bipartisan bill that was being worked on by Democrats and Republicans in the Senate that Joe Biden was looking to sign. The important part here is that we're talking about social perceptions. It's going to be difficult to disentangle the politics of an issue from the social perceptions of that issue. The fear around immigration had reached such a fever pitch because conservatives wouldn't stop talking about it. They specifically framed it as a crisis at the border, often using words like invasion. I'm not here to break down if immigration is actually a major issue for the US. It isn't, in the way that conservatives say that it is. But the political context here is very important to understand what happened to John Fetterman. These negotiations in the Senate between Democrats and Republicans produced a piece of legislation that was good for moderates but rejected by a lot of others, for very different reasons. Many Republicans opposed the bill because Trump wanted them to. The passage of this bill would have been a political win for Joe Biden, despite it handing over basically everything Republicans wanted to see on the issue of immigration for the last several years. Basically, Republicans didn't want a solution, they wanted the perception of a crisis under a Democratic president. And many in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party opposed the bill because of its contents. The bill was unveiled in February of 2024 and was being connected to Ukraine funding, funding for Israel, funding for Taiwan, and a couple of other things. Very generally, the immigration portion of the bill was this: a required shutdown of the border if there are more than 5,000 encounters as a 7-week average, expanded powers for the president to shut down the border, a raised standard for asylum claims, an end to catch and release, replacing it with holding lawful entries for 90 days as they complete asylum claims, after which they're either let in or expelled. And the bill had no mention of DACA or Dreamers, a policy that Fetterman claims to care about a lot. From a progressive point of view, this bill was a total capitulation to the right, giving them almost everything they've been wanting for years. And John Fetterman supported the bill, but not just passively, and not just because it would have been a win for Joe Biden. He took it a step further. In an interview with the New York Post, John Fetterman on immigration said this: "There is a crisis. We have a crisis at our border, and it can't be controversial that we should have a secure border." He then cited the more than 300,000 border encounters in December 2023 and said, quote, "That's larger than the population of Pittsburgh. That's Pennsylvania's second largest city, and that's 1 month." And when asked about being a progressive still, he said, quote, "It's not so much that I left the title left me." This isn't just John Fetterman being more moderate on the issue. The framing that this is a crisis, that this is an invasion, that hundreds of thousands of immigrants are flooding into the country is explicitly right-wing. It's also important to note that that 300,000 number is border encounters. It's not 300,000 people staying now in the country. It also doesn't account for if the encounter was unique or if it's just the same person coming back in the same month. I simply find it difficult to believe that you support humane immigration policies when you're not legislating any of them into existence, and when you're supporting very harsh ones that are connected to Joe Biden's complete surrender to the right wing. Now, I hear you. He always said he wanted a secure border. But this feels like a far cry from the initial stance of, we're a nation of immigrants and we should be proud of that, plus my wife was undocumented. The policies he supports through that immigration deal would have made it harder or perhaps impossible for his wife to ever make it to the country. I think it's hard to say that John Fetterman didn't shift on this issue. Where he was once talking about immigration reforms and a compassionate answer, he's now fear-mongering about a crisis at the border. He's now making arbitrary comparisons to cities in Pennsylvania as an excuse to legislate even harsher border policies. Even if he was never leftist or never progressive on this issue, he certainly moved to the right. The left didn't leave him. A Fetterman defender might say that immigration has gotten worse since he initially ran in 2022, which would justify a harsher stance. But border encounters were similarly very high when he was running for Senate. Sure, we broke records since then, but it's not like we weren't having a lot of people show up back then too. A Fetterman defender could also say that he was just following behind the president, but that seems bad too, no? That he would go against his previously held compassionate values just to support a Democratic president? All because Biden skewed conservative on this issue to try to dunk on Republicans? So did progressives leave John Fetterman as he described? No. John Fetterman left progressives on this issue. As soon as the immigration issue got more attention than it's received in a long time, he abandoned those compassionate values. When the heat got turned up, he got out of the kitchen. When his compassion towards immigrants was tested, he failed. Before moving on, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, you guys. This really isn't our usual type of content. We almost exclusively make long-form podcasts or very short-form content that we put on TikTok or Instagram Reels or the forbidden YouTube Shorts. But it's summertime, so I wanted to try something new. None of this would be possible, though, without your support through your viewership and through your support on our Patreon. If you want to see more content like this and maybe get early access to stuff I'll make in the future, consider becoming a patron. And if you like this style of content, I intend to make some more of these throughout the course of the summer, so if you have any specific topics you'd want me to do a deep dive on, go ahead and comment that or DM us or whatever. If it's a good idea, maybe I can turn it into a 10 or 20 minute deep dive video. I have a couple of ideas lined up already, but I would love to hear what you want to see. And of course, if you offer an idea that I end up using, I'll credit you in the video. And if you hate this content, I guess you can tell me that too. You can tell me to stay in my lane, get back to work, stop being a lazy liberal or something. Unlike John Fetterman, when I say something, I mean it. So thank you for your support. We couldn't do it without you. And back to the video. Israel is the more difficult component to analyze here. The treatment of Palestinians was still a major issue in 2022, but for a while, it didn't occupy the same political space that it certainly is occupying now. It wasn't very salient in the 2022 midterm elections, so it was hard to get a taste for what John Fetterman really felt. Before the 2022 race, Fetterman hadn't really spoken on Israel at all. In fact, in 2017, when he was running for lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania, he saw an endorsement, which he didn't get, from the DSA in Pittsburgh, an organization that isn't fond of the treatment of Palestinians and can easily be characterized as progressive. I mean, socialist is in the name. This left a lot of people to assume, also based on his previously progressive rhetoric and his endorsement of Bernie Sanders, that if the issue ever came up, he would at least be somewhat critical of the treatment of Palestinians and critical of Israel for that treatment. That assumption was a mistake. In 2022, Fetterman received $174,000 from J Street, a pro-Israel lobbying organization. According to Open Secrets, J Street was the biggest donor for him in 2022. Of course, those that get more from J Street and AIPAC and similar lobbying organizations are more likely to support Israel and whatever they want to do. But I think Fetterman's support goes deeper than the average liberal. In fact, I think it's strictly conservative. Before October 7th, the only actual in-depth source I could find for Fetterman's stance on Israel was written by the Jewish Inquirer in 2022 during his race for Senate. Even if this publication has some kind of bias, Fetterman's position here is unmistakable. I'll read a few quotes from Fetterman himself, and you can judge. Whenever I'm in a situation to be called on to take up the cause of strengthening and enhancing the security of Israel or deepening our relationship between the United States and Israel, I'm going to lean in. I would also respectfully say that I'm not really a progressive in that sense. Our campaign is based on core democratic values and principles, and always has been. And there is no daylight between myself and these kinds of unwavering commitments to Israel's security. Reading from the article more generally, quote, Fetterman said he is equally passionate about his opposition to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement targeting Israel. It's just wrong, he said. Israel is our closest ally and friend in the region, and I do not believe that it is anything productive that enhances not only Israel's security, but the region's security through that process. More broadly, Fetterman said he is in favor of continued U.S. security assistance for Israel without any additional conditions. That is guaranteed in a 10-year memorandum of understanding between the two countries. Fetterman also in this article voiced support for the Abraham Accords. This is a series of normalization agreements between Israel and the neighboring Arab countries. Importantly, these accords specifically excluded Palestinians and was arguably a precursor to October 7th. It was also a policy started under the Trump administration. Fast forward a little bit, and Fetterman is still showcasing the same exact beliefs. Almost immediately after October 7th, he came out in support of Israel, which almost every politician did. He also very quickly shot down the idea of a ceasefire. He also offered some language about humanitarian aid, but it doesn't mean a whole lot when you're the reason the humanitarian aid needs to be there to begin with. Shortly after, Fetterman hung up posters of all of the Israeli hostages taken by Hamas in his office, some of which have been killed by Israel, by the way. Not bad in and of itself, but paired with the near complete disregard for Palestinians feels vapid and empty. At a protest in DC to garner support for Israel, he literally wrapped himself in the Israeli flag, wearing it as a cape. As the death toll for Palestinians increased in the Gaza Strip, he began to reject the idea of conditions on Israeli aid whatsoever, which is what he said before in 2022. But it sharply contrasts with this seemingly genuine desire to want to help Palestinian civilians, but this is a broader political conundrum for a lot of Zionists. He also had quite the banger tweet, including Canadian rapper Aubrey Drake Graham, seeming to suggest that protesters should protest Hamas's actions rather than Israel's actions, or maybe he's using the word hummus in the literal sense, not the kind of TikTokified version of the word. I don't know, the tweet was later deleted anyway. When the Flower Massacre occurred, an event where the IDF opened fire on Palestinians attempting to receive aid from an aid truck, Fetterman pinned the blame on Hamas and absolved Israel of really any responsibility. He again reiterated his opposition to conditions in March and called for the release of hostages. He also opposed a ceasefire in March and blamed Hamas for the famine in Palestine, not Israel. I wonder if he'd be interested to know that Israel got the most amount of hostages back under conditions of a ceasefire with Hamas. Something to think about. He was against the UN Security Council vote to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. He reiterated his opposition to conditions on Israeli aid several times. He came out against UN membership for Palestine. He endorsed Mitt Romney for Harvard president to recalibrate from far-left orthodoxy. What the fuck am I reading? Of course, he came out against student protests for Palestine. Look, you get the picture, and a lot of this has been ramping up. A lot of what I just read to you was from March and April, and all of this is being said in the backdrop of tens of thousands of Palestinians being slaughtered by Israel. He's like one step away from mimicking wifeless Lindsey Graham about leveling the Gaza Strip.
We're in a religious war here. I am with Israel. Do whatever the hell you have to do to defend yourself. Level the place.
But the question is, was this a switch up? I certainly think one of the reasons Fetterman is so ardently pro-Israel now is because of the money behind groups like J Street. Simply because he never really talked about Israel until his 2022 Senate run, which is when he started getting money from these groups. But outside of that, it has to be something deeper. Like with immigration, you can be pro-Israel through your votes and vaguely gesture at bringing the hostages home. But you don't need to go this far in your support, alienating the people that supported you previously. What I'm saying is you don't need to do all of this to get the AIPAC money. There's something more here, something ideological about his commitment to Zionism. We seem very far away from the John Fetterman that cares about the minimum wage and criminal justice reforms when he is refusing all conditions on Israel, a country that has massacred thousands of civilians in only 7 months. Maybe he changed, or maybe he was always like this and we didn't know until he ran for Senate. Either way, the left-wing principles and people that got him elected have certainly been abandoned. Even if Fetterman rejected the progressive label later in his political life, his position on immigration at least moved to the right. And while his Zionism was clear from 2022 for those that were looking for it, his total lack of compassion on the issue feels distinct from his previous rhetoric. But why does the stages of one senator's political ideology even matter at all? I think it reveals something larger about our politics. Maybe this isn't a story about one guy, but rather a story about liberalism, Zionism, and their weaknesses. Maybe it's about how candidates use progressive language and the perception of them as a progressive candidate to their advantage, but abandon those same principles when it suits them. Or maybe it's not that Fetterman changed at all, but we never had a chance to really see who he was. Maybe it's a cautionary tale about loud, bombastic political figures and how we shouldn't really trust them even if we like their message. Undeniably, John Fetterman was the correct choice for Senate, at least in the general election. But that doesn't mean John Fetterman doesn't deserve criticism. And it doesn't mean that we can't use his shifting political character to gain insight into would-be progressive candidates. And to be fair, he's not awful on every issue. He's still pro-labor, he still speaks out about anti-LGBTQ sentiments, but he is undeniably bad on immigration and Israel. When he's bad, he's really bad. So what's my assessment? I think, like a lot of politicians, Fetterman governs more moderately than he talks. This is true for a lot of people in Congress and can be excused at times. We can't see every string that is on every politician at all moments. But I really think this goes beyond the typical politician. Fetterman's general ideology in 2022 seemed to be progressive. And even after he said publicly that he was just a regular Democrat, he still voiced that same message of compassion and relatability. And you won't convince me that he wasn't aware of how he was being perceived in the media and by the left wing of the electorate. But on these hot button issues, he has drifted to the right, especially when things get divisive and the room gets sweaty. It's easy to look progressive and gain the political benefits that come along with progressivism when the stakes are low. But it's hard to stay progressive when you decide who lives and who dies. The colorful language about acceptance and compassion is great until you're the one sending bombs overseas. He was progressive because it was easy. The interest group money is certainly a consideration as well. If you're pandering for pro-Israel money, you're going to have to do pro-Israel things. But I think there's something more there. Sure, maybe he used the progressive label simply because it was easy electorally. And maybe he's more moderate when he governs and when he's paid to be moderate. But this goes beyond just simply being moderate. He's gone full conservative on these issues, and it's not necessary. Not for his survival in the Democratic Party, not for his popularity as a senator, and not if he ever wants to rebuild the coalition of people that got him elected in 2022. And that's the piece I can't really explain. But maybe you can. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. As I said, I plan to make more of these kinds of videos over the next several months, so if you like them, let me know. And if you have ideas, also let me know. All of the sources I used will be linked in the description if you want to check them out yourself. And I thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. And John, if you're watching this right now, put on a fucking suit.